Adoption of discipline and responsibility is what will free us. And again, the biggest responsibility that we can take up today is African unification. The freedom of Africa is lacking in our unity. Now, why do I insist on us taking up the African unity seriously? The first thing is that today we worship the USA and the West in general as the freest people, as the happiest people. Even if I told you the pursuit of happiness is nonsense, we need to pursue responsibility. But they are not. They are not the happiest people, but they are happier than Africa today because they are taking on more responsibility than Africa today. See, life is more serious is much more profound, much more complicated, much more serious than looking for a funny laugh. And that's why it's good that some black men are making some money out of sports, but it's derogative for us to be the entertainers of the world, the global clowns, the musicians, the sportsmen, while other people are taking up stronger responsibilities like vaccinations, like fighting disease and epidemics, like technology, like going to Mars. Why can't this be African problems? Because you've forgotten your responsibility of uniting. Africa was one Africa. We had multiple tribes, but we were one Africa, one empire, and we knew it. You can tell from the language. We are a we culture. We are brothers. That speech you see in black Americans of brother, sis, sister, didn't come out of nowhere. It comes from the African spirit, and it was right there on the slave farms, and they left Africa with it. These were strangers that just met. Different boats brought different peoples every day. But they knew they were brothers, and everywhere black people go on earth, they know they are brothers. Today, you've been divided because of, again, apeness. Sometimes you reach neighborhoods and you see black people that don't know that. Capitalism has taught you to be selfish, and you think that's being modern, and you've forgotten your responsibility. But Africa works best and is the most powerful entity united. And that's why you see it's deliberate that the West won't have Africa unite. I've told you, you've seen how the forefathers were assassinated for trying to unite Africa in the 60s, to bring in the illiterate King's Rifles, second generation presidents of dictators and war generals that militarized African leadership politics. That crop starts from that second generation, mostly uneducated, you know. And soon as they also became patriotic, that's when now that gave permission to the Western powers to come back with things like the UN Peace Force, that up to today, is there to police African business and all those things that we don't need in Africa. Now, that generation, like I've said, is gone. But the mantle is now upon us youth to save the day. Now, again, telling you about where Christianity comes from. One of the Samaritan meta stories, myths of the origin of the world, talk about Marduk. Marduk is the name of the Babylonian king, but it comes from the Babylonians trying to copy the Egyptians, named named their god Marduk, because that was the name of the king. It's very, it's very Western to do that. But Marduk, to create the earth, first engulfs termite, chaos, in a net. And only then was he able to chop termite into pieces and create the earth. African youth have to think about uniting Africa first. Like Kwame Nkrumah suggested in 1963 at the first OAU meeting. To think that you'll unite Africa at a national level first before you can have the United States of Africa is madness. The world doesn't operate that way. Because time is going, and as more and more generations come, they become more delusional, and they lose purpose and the sense of the urgency of this. You can also see the onslaught of the Chinese that are invading and trying to buy Africa left and right. In fact, the only thing that prevents the Chinese from buying Africa is the second enemy, the Western world, that still has interests in Africa and can't let go of Africa. So the African youth, you're born in a world where people are negotiating on who should take the largest chunk of your own house while you're living in it, and you have no word at all. You have no say. And you've been fooled with fake money that doesn't exist, with this useless division used to turn against your own brothers and to turn against yourselves. There's nothing as pathetic as Africans killing each other in these days and times, when we should be thinking about unity and trade and moving on. Militias and rebel movements of black people shooting other black people to protect the white man interests that are taking more and more minerals from Africa. It's very pathetic. And only us, the youth, can solve that. Because very soon, these warlords are going to die. And they will have their children there. And we must know who is funding those guns. I've told you, the King's Rifles. The king that I talk to when I talk about the King's Rifles, of course, starts from the King of Britain. Because the King of Britain is the one that was arming original African armies. And up to today, the guns come from Europe because you don't make your weapons. And so the armies that you call your national armies are all armed by Europe. And so they really belong to the colonizers. And in fact, their biggest job is protect the colonizers' constitution, because again, he's the one who framed that against your own will, you people. And that's why, as we talk about this African integration, we need to think about taking everyone through military training. You see, there are two ways to disarm people. And thank God we have an example from the US. How has America managed to have everyone hold a gun and yet they have not shot themselves to death? The reason they have not shot themselves to death is, first of all, because everyone has a gun. So they can protect themselves. The second reason is that before you get a gun, you're trained on the power of the gun. Africa today has the King's rifles that are armed and not trained, some not trained, the militias definitely not trained about gun use and gun handling and the power of a gun. And a population that has been totally willfully ignorant about guns. So while militias are holding guns, the generations remain adamant. And that's why you're killed, because you're useless. So African youth have to demand that we go back to our military training days. We need to go back and train. Because if we all have guns, then no one will mess with us. We can put up a fight and take out the enemy very quickly. If not that, then again, uniting Africa creates a bigger army that can then be dispatched to contain that situation, any situation. And we need an African army to handle African business, not a UN peacekeeping army sponsored by the West. Because if the West is sponsoring it, then it's catering to Western interests. Can't burn the hand that feeds you. Or the monkey doesn't burn the bush. So you send the US peacekeeping force and you expect them to ban the West? Then no, they're going to ban Africa, who doesn't pay it. Anyway, so by uniting Africa as soon as possible, then we can identify the dragons within the new formed African state. And start dealing with these dragons one by one at the individual level. Before they cascade into, descent of virtue and a bigger problem that we can't handle. But we are fooling ourselves if we think that we'll be able to have a united Africa before we engulf termite in a net. Because what stops us from solving African problems is we have been disenfranchised and we don't have power over being able to help. There are strong armies. There are strong armies like the Ugandan army, the Kenyan army in East Africa. I believe the Nigerian army is very strong too. South African army, the Egyptian army. These are strong armies. If all this was an African force, they would be able to contain any military problem in Africa and would be celebrating victories over victories every day for those who can't reform. Easily. If you got Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and even the Somalis, and even the little DRC army that is left, they would be able to contain any African militia warlord problem in seconds. And now it's with that simple dragon that I'm bringing to you, it's easy for you to identify why these warlords even exist and their purpose. And their enemy is African unity, because they know once there's African unity, then they can be wiped out. So why would you let that happen? Once they're wiped out, then they can't steal the African minerals and gold. And this is why they fight. People don't kill people for nothing. They kill people for wealth, for that stupid wealth, earthly wealth. And that wealth is useless in Africa because you're going to have to ship it and the government will catch up with it anyway. So there are those planes that fly at night and come and pick this wealth. Hidden airports in the deep forests of Africa that are stealing minerals left and right. That's what they are protecting. And the politicians know about this because they're also corrupted and they fear being assassinated. And that's the crop, the dead crop. Because if you don't have responsibility, you don't have virtue. That's why they become entitled, they become adversaries. Because they come from a crop that had a tyrant national army and an Edipo Europe. So Europe is like the overprotective mom that keeps giving you aid to keep you crippled. And the king's rifles are there as the tyrant dad that keep you terrorized and in tyranny. And again stop you from breathing, from having responsibility. Every time an African is trying to get responsibility, the army comes in to stop you. Think about it, African youth. Every time you start a business, who is after you? Every time you try to express yourself, who is after you? And what's the biggest problem of Africa that keeps you in debt so that you have to pay all these taxes anyway? So those are the two enemies. The overprotective mother, Europe, and the tyrant culture, the army. And these all have nothing to do with Africa. But the earlier the youth understand that, the better for Africa. So, I know everything I'm saying seems like bad news, but there's good news. What's the good news? The good news is that the African youth today, we have a purpose. We have a way to put life together and make our environment better, transcendently. That's now and better. And the future. A man said that a society is as good as the number of the burdening youth. That Africa is as good as those warlords, those bad leaders, all that tyranny and all that aid that you see. We are only as good as that. And so for us to become better is by eliminating that. And those are noble purposes and noble responsibilities and disciplines for us to go after as African youth. Reduce the tyranny, reduce the aid. But to do that, we have to engulf all of them as an African youth problem. That means that we have to be an African nation. We're not going to be able to fight aid and tyranny in Africa divided. We have to first unite. And the people in power now, the older generation, is just dragging us. They are going to die. I mean, look at the agenda they've set. The 2063 agenda. That's when they hope to unite Africa, which means that the presidents of Africa today will all be dead. This means that it's upon us, the youth, to unite Africa. And we need to start now. We need to unite Africa now, today. We need to come up quickly with elections, choose a leader, and get to work. Identifying and taming the little dragons within Africa. And coming up with strategic plans in our future. And it's madness and being shallow-minded for us to entrench ourselves into this cheap politics that we see. This is a misled politics from a dead generation. Because politics without responsibility is nonsense. Should be nonsense to us, to you, the African youth, because we are going to build our future based on responsibility. We're not going to cry for rights and be babies and cry for help and aid. We're going to take up arms and face our challenges. We're going to empower ourselves through knowledge and face our challenges. This is how we contend with the unbearable suffering in Africa. This is how we negotiate ourselves into habitable order. This is how we dialogue. And this should be the topics among African youth. This should be the dialogue. That's why I started this channel. So we can talk, we can engage and talk. And I invite you to come to the channel, let's talk. Invite a friend. I told you eventually I'll be interviewing people all over Africa. Top thinkers and globally, friends of Africa. Because the world needs this for Africa. Because Africa has become a burden to the world. That's why you see, the refugee problems all over the world, the African problems. We are now dying on sinking ships as we are being chased out of European shores. Because we are seeking safety, which is a lie. Because there is no such thing as safety. We can only be courageous and strong and face our evils, face our problems. We are the perpetrators of all that evil you see in Africa. We are responsible for those problems. And we can't cause problems and think we are going to run away to Europe. They don't want us there because they know we come as damaged goods and we're going to cause more problems there. That's why you see black people are shot left and right in America. But why don't you come back home? Come back home and let's discipline each other. That freedom that you see in America came out of war, out of death. Many people had to die until they realized that it has always been the individual's problem. When you see an authoritarian government, you know that the individuals are authoritarian. When you see an illiterate leader, you know the people are illiterate. Because how would a responsible literate person empower an illiterate? You can't say the dictators took up power. Took up power how? A few thugs come and take over the country? It's nonsense. You empowered them. The fact that you can do nothing about it means you've empowered them. And that's why I'm telling you that if we unite as Africa, we can do something about the warlords in Africa. But the problem is, we are too naive to even know that. And so you find that even the people that were killed yesterday, when you tell them about uniting Africa, they are talking about prolonging, forgetting that the solution to their troubles and problems are in uniting Africa, because once we are united, we are powerful to contain evil. Because I believe, much as we are very evil, we also are equally very good. And good always wins. Because that's how we transcend. I mean, if we're all evil and we kill each other, again we die. So good still wins because we all kill each other. Until there's no one to kill. So the last one has no one to kill, so is by default good. So good always wins. But for us to harness that goodness, we have to look within ourselves and dialogue and negotiate. What else can we talk about? So exactly, so that negotiation, that dialogue and negotiation I'm talking about is the, individual divinity, the image of God in us, the God in us, all that. That's what that simply means, And I told you in my previous post about how to be great, through serving the many, you know. I believe it's the Bible that says that do unto others as you do unto yourself, you know. Love your neighbors as you love yourself, something like that. It's a very fundamental. That treat yourself like you matter. But how do you treat yourself like you matter? You treat yourself like you matter by treating others like they matter. Or acting out the proposition that everyone matters. And that's the ultimate goal of existence. That to be good to yourself, you have to be good to others. Because if you're only good to yourself, then the others will come for you. And that's the thing. That brings us to also how to solve the problem of equality. Because equality is eating up the whole world, unequal distribution of resources. But where does equality come from? So I'll give you a perspective. The left, the radical left and the left-leaning people psychologically have two fundamental traits: conscientiousness and creativity. And because of this, they are very high in empathy. They want fairness. They have that moral obligation. It's more like it's a feminist, more of a female thing, because men and women are very alike, but women tend to have that agreeableness a little bit more than men, and so women have more empathy because of that. I believe because of that, childbearing thing. You have to be nice and protective of the baby, so they are protectors, and so that's why you see most of the activists end up being women. But anyway, conscientiousness, which is also again from the left, is also creativity. That's why women were gatherers, and they're the best farmers, and they're the best workers. I don't know why women, they're the best doctors. Women are also very creative. But not only women, but left-leaning people. People on the left, in politics, political left, is that they're also creative. But in being creative, again, you create hierarchies. This is a natural order. You create hierarchies. And of course, hierarchies cause inequality, because there are people at the top, and then there are people at the bottom. And this is how the problem of inequality is spread, because the people at the top get more. than the people at the bottom. The distribution problem kicks in there, you know. But how are hierarchies caused? Hierarchies are caused because the people at the bottom have failed to come up with new important inventions that impact people, that are helpful. They have failed to serve the many. They have failed to choose the right responsibility. And because you have failed to choose the right responsibility, then you get what you deserve, and nature forces you to be at the bottom of the pyramid. This then turns them into getting frustrated, and they begin hating the successful. And that's where this cry for equality comes from. And then they feel like the successful are successful because they've exploited them, and so the successful owe them in some form of way, you know. So how do we solve inequality? We look at what the right does. What does the right do? The right is high in orderliness as a psychological trait.